Welcome to the Effortless English Show with the world's #1 English teacher, AJ Hogue, where AJ's more than 40 million students worldwide finally learn English once and for all, without the boring textbooks, classrooms, and grammar drills. Here's AJ with a quick piece to help you learn to speak fluent English effortlessly.
I'm AJ Hogue, the author of Effortless English, Learn to Speak English Like a Native, and of course, father of the effortless English system that trains you, that teaches you to speak English fluently, to speak English powerfully, to speak excellently. When you commit to my VIP program at effortlessenglishclub.com, go there, join, commit, don't quit, effortlessenglishclub.com. Welcome. Check my microphone. All right. Today we have an interview, another interview. I am interviewing today David the Good. We're live on Facebook right now. Just want to say hello to everyone joining. Now, as usual, during the interview, probably not going to look at your comments or questions. Hopefully at the end, I will have some time and you can ask David questions. Now, who is David the Good? David the Good is an expert on gardening, food forests. We'll talk about what a food forest is with David. Composting, some of you might know what that means. If not, we'll talk about composting. Growing your own food, basically. You know, he's an expert on this. He's got several books about it. I'd like to just introduce a couple of his books right now. See if I can show you the screen. Okay, so this is just from Amazon. Just the Amazon page. He's got several books. So I've got a few of these books. Compost Everything. That's a really nice one on composting, right? How to build soil, how to build the dirt. If you have some dirt, even a little tiny bit, how to make it so you can grow plants, very healthy, strong plants and good food in any kind of dirt. Called Compost Everything. And remember his name, David the Good, is his writing name. He has one called Create Your Own Florida Food Forest, but I think it's probably useful not just for people who live in Florida, but just useful in general. And the third one's called Grow or Die, The Guide to Survival Gardening, which I have that one also. Finally, he has a video show. He is on Unauthorized TV. He has a channel, and the channel is called Grow or Die. So Unauthorized TV has several channels on it, different people, different topics. But his channel, of course, is on gardening and growing food and things like that. And his channel is Grow or Die. But the website, unauthorized.tv, unauthorized.tv is his website, his video channel. So you can join there. If you want to support them, you can get a membership and support. I'm a member, actually. I'm a member of Unauthorized. That's how I found him and his channel. And then I got some of his books. So good stuff if you're interested in any of these topics. So while we're talking, if you like, you can certainly type your questions for him about gardening, growing food, composting, even homesteading. Homesteading means like building your own or having your own home, usually in the countryside, and you grow some of your own food and kind of living a simple life, right? Not city living, okay? We call that homesteading in English. Gardening, I'm sure you can garden. Even people in cities can garden sometimes. If you have just a little space somewhere, you can do some gardening. So if you have any kind of questions about gardening, growing food, composting, all these things, so let me know. So now, before we get started, I'll call him in just a couple minutes. I'm scheduled to call him in just a couple minutes. If you have any questions now, if you have any questions about the topic, please type them now and I'll explain more if you don't understand. Like Abdul says, what are you speaking about? It's an interview today with an expert on gardening and growing food. So growing your own food, not growing like a big farm, but just growing food for yourself and your family. That's what he is an expert. His name is David the Good. He has many different books, many books on this topic at Amazon. And he has a video channel, Unauthorized TV. I'm working on in urban agriculture, says Babu Ali. Well, nice. So you should like this topic quite a lot, I think. All right. Anna says she loves gardening, which is great. Simplicity is the key to freedom. Rafiko, fantastic. All right. Seems like you guys basically understand everything. Good. So I found him because, I'm interested in this topic. I am not... I'm not an expert in this topic. I'm not even good in this topic. Okay. This is something new. It's something I'm interested in, but I'm not doing it right now because, see, some of you know, because of our new babies, I'm thinking probably in a few years when they get a little bigger, we're thinking to move to the countryside more and maybe build a house, buy or build a house. And then I'm very interested in growing some of our own food, very interested in some of his ideas, for example, about food forests, which we'll talk about, homesteading. So this is why I'm interested in the topic. This is why I'm reading books about this topic now. It's why I started watching his video channel on unauthorized.tv. So it's a very interesting topic to me, but I really don't know a lot about it. I tried gardening one time many years ago and was not very good at it. So I'm quite curious to some topics when I do an interview, I know a lot about them. I've read a lot about them. And then other topics like this one, I read a little bit. I'm very interested, but I don't have much practical experience. All right, so let's talk to the real expert then. You don't want to listen to me talk about gardening. Okay, so let's do it, shall we? All right, I'm going to call David, and let's hope everything goes well with our connection. One second. All right, and which camera am I on? Oh, I'm on that camera. This camera? Weird. Let's see. I'm going to put me on the other camera. All right. There we go. That'll work. Here we go. Let's begin. Waiting. Ringing. All right, I am calling. Well, hello.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, great.
How's my audio sound?
Pretty good. Let me I'm going to raise it up a little bit. Yep, you're good.
All right, cool.
You hear me okay?
I can hear you okay. It's crackling a little bit.
Okay, let me drop it down a bit. All right.
I think it may just be a connection issue. I don't think that it's gain overblowing.
Okay. Well, nice to meet you, first of all, and thank you for joining us.
Nice to meet you too. So, AJ?
AJ, that's right. I'm AJ. Yes.
Good. Just making sure.
Yep, David. And do you have video or just audio?
I can do video.
Let's do video if you can.
Light the room and check and see if I've got a good light. 1 second.
Okay, so guys, we're just getting set up, just getting the video going. There we go. All right.
See me all right here?
Yep, you're good. I'm curious, where are you? Just roughly.
I am in Central America.
Ah, right. Okay. I thought you were traveling. You're not in Florida at the moment, no.
Right. I don't live in Florida anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I moved out of the United States just over 3 years ago.
Oh, okay, great. Now, just to introduce you again, really quickly, that you're an expert on gardening. Tell me if I missed something. Gardening, food forests, composting, homesteading, or
That's right. Yes, small scale homesteading. Backyard gardening, growing as much food as possible for the least amount of work.
that's why I liked your channel, by the way. I found you on Unauthorized TV first, and then I got some of your books. And I was just telling me I'm not doing any gardening now, but I just had a couple children. We're planning to move to the countryside a couple of years, so I've started reading about permaculture and homesteading, and I've watched Owen's channel too, and where he's talking about some of these things, but then he talks about the way he's doing it, how he can't even leave the house one day because he's got to milk goats and all of this stuff, and
too much work.
Yeah, so can you just talk about how you got started, and then your approach, which is, as you said, getting the maximum amount out of the minimal amount of work.
Right. Well, I started gardening when I was a kid. I was 6 years old. I sprouted a bean in a cup. When I was at school, they gave us a little cup of soil, and they gave us beans, and they said, plant these and keep them watered, and they're going to sprout. And I did that, and it sprouted. And to me, that was a miracle. That was the most amazing thing I think I'd ever seen at that point. And so the next year, my parents pulled me out of school and taught me at home. So I
homeschooled everybody. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was homeschooled all the way through from when I was still 6 and then on through high school. And that I told my dad that I was really interested in gardening and I wanted to garden. So my dad took a little piece of the backyard and he cleared the grass out and he put some boards in and he got some good soil and put it in there, because this was South Florida. And in South Florida, we have a tropical climate, but the soil is terrible. It's sand. It's almost like gardening on the beach. It's empty, dead sand. So he put some dirt in there, and I would use the little extra money that I would earn doing jobs to buy seeds. And I was always buying seeds and planting them in this little 8-foot by 8-foot space. So what's that? 2.5 meters by 2.5 meters for my international audience. So that's how I got started in gardening. And I killed a lot of plants. I didn't know what I was doing. I would read what it said on the seed package, but a lot of the seeds were coming from farther north. So they would say, plant in full sun, plant in late spring after all danger of frost. And I was in a tropical climate or subtropical climate, and that kills almost everything. If you are gardening in a really warm climate where it doesn't freeze, that was basically the beginning of the hot, dry season. And the sunlight in the tropics is way more intense than it is up north. So I learned by killing plants over and over and over again what wanted to grow and what didn't. And I started to see the patterns in it as I got older. And when I got married and I moved to my own place, I wanted to do, raise chickens and goats and all these different things. So eventually we got chickens and goats and guinea fowl, and we raised some ducks. And what I found was raising animals was a lot more work than trying to raise plants. And the very easiest thing to do, I believe, is to plant a few fruit trees or a few nut trees and grow those. Because after the first few years of work, you can pretty much walk away and it's going to keep producing food for a generation or two. If you walk away from your chickens, they'll get eaten by something, or they'll all die. They'll starve to death. If you walk away from your goats, the same thing happens. They quit producing milk. They get sick. They die. If you walk away from a garden of sweet corn and radishes and beans, you might be able to walk away for 2 weeks, but much more than that, it's going to die and it's done. And you'll never know. A year from now, you'll never know that there was ever a garden planted in that place because there's no evidence of those plants. They're just gone. But if you walk away from a fruit tree after 2 to 3 years, that fruit tree just keeps growing. You can abandon it. You can find old fruit trees in houses and farms all over the place that haven't been taken care of for years, and they're still making fruit. So that's how I started to move towards, how do I make the most amount of food for the least amount of work?
Right, right. You've got that video on your video channel. I think it's a 9-year-old food forest. You went back and visited that you'd planted it, and now at some friend's house. And then you're going around and you're showing 9 years later of complete neglect and all these different plants, and they're still producing food. Yeah,
it was 3 years after I left, and the woman that bought the property ended up not moving to it for a long time, and then moving to it and not maintaining it because she was taking care of a sick family member. So I saw what happened when you just left everything was left alone for 3 years. And I could still go in there and harvest. There are hundreds of pounds of roots in the ground that have just become perennial. There are yams that are growing in the ground that are perennial yams. I dug roots this big out of the ground there after years of just nobody doing anything. There's probably 400 to 500 pounds of citrus fruit, oranges, kumquats, grapefruits, lemons that are just growing there and taking care of themselves because they were established, they got strong when they were young, and then you walk away, it doesn't really matter. They'll produce more if somebody takes care of them, but they're not dead. You know, they're still producing.
Right. And you can walk away. You could go and easily take a 3-month vacation or a 4-month vacation and come back and do a little work, and you're or longer, years in this case.
Right, exactly. I could walk away from it, and it's going to be fine.
So what are the kind of, the classification or the types of plants? Let's say if someone's just getting started, they've got, kind of like that little space you showed on your video. So not a very large area to grow in. And, what kind of plants would you suggest starting with that are going to give the most bang for the buck or the time?
Well, it depends on what your goal is. Mm-hmm. If you approach it with the goal of, I would like food as fast as possible. I want to start growing my own food as fast as possible and start getting healthy, organic, pesticide-free food. Mm-hmm. You might start with growing your own salad garden. Plant some lettuce seeds, some spinach seeds. You might plant some snap peas, some string beans, radishes, mustard greens, basil. These things grow very, very fast. And within 30 days of starting that, you could start picking little leaves. And in 2 months, you will have all of your salads taken care of out of maybe a 4-foot by 4-foot space. So even a 1 meter square garden would provide you with enough salads for one person that you could eat regular healthy greens. And you just keep replanting as the plants kind of give up and they get older and you put a few more in. You could just keep going. If you wanted to replace your food long-term and not work very hard at it, I would pick some areas to grow root crops where you can get a lot of your calories out of the ground. So potatoes, yams, taro root, things like that, where you have beds of roots that you can get your carbohydrates with. And at the same time, every year I would plant a few fruit and nut trees. Nut trees are one of the best to replace grain crops, so you don't have to buy as much grain. So if you eat a handful of nuts, that's better for you than eating a bread roll. It's healthier for you. It's got more fat, more protein, more nutrients to it, and it makes you feel full and it makes you feel strong. But nut trees take years to get established. It might be 4 or 5 years before you're getting anything. So in the interim, you start by growing your roots and carbohydrates in the ground. You start with annual gardens because annual plants are the plants that produce in 1 year. They grow really fast. They produce. So like rice and wheat. Those are annual crops, but they're grains. They're too big a scale. I much prefer growing roots because in a backyard you can get a lot more calories in a small space growing roots than you can growing grains. But with your annuals, those are your real fast, real quick production. And that's what most of the world grows, are annual crops. But if you have longer term thinking, if you're thinking of your children and your grandchildren, if you're thinking of growing older, you're thinking of the future a few years down the road, you cannot beat growing nut trees and fruit trees, because eventually those trees are going to feed you with almost no work. You're not going to be hacking at the ground and digging up roots.
Right.
You can be eating from the tree. If you're in the tropics, you would plant something like a breadfruit tree or a bread nut tree. The bread nut tree, you eat the nuts out of it, and they're a nice little carbohydrate nut. They only take 3 or 4 years to start producing. Same thing with breadfruit, 3 or 4 years to start producing, but it makes a lot of carbohydrates. If you get farther north, you obviously don't have that. You would probably be looking at pecans or edible hickories or hazelnut, as you go farther north, or walnuts. A lot of those, chestnuts is another good one. Chinese chestnuts are a very good little tree, very blight resistant, and they actually produce, you can get nuts in 3 to 5 years from a Chinese chestnut tree. So it's not really a long-term waiting, but you do your hard work gardening the first few years to get food quickly to your table.
Right.
And then long-term, you're just picking the fruit from the trees, mulching, pruning occasionally, and just kind of keeping an eye on them.
The roots that you mentioned, are those annuals or perennials? Like if you just leave them, will they just keep? Because you'd mentioned the food forest you'd revisited, that you had this huge amount of roots.
A lot of the root crops are actually perennials, or at least biennials, meaning biennial is a 2-year crop. Mm-hmm. So the first year it makes a big root. This is usually colder climates. First year it makes a big root. This is something like beets or turnips. They might make a big root the first year, and then the root lives through the cold winter underneath the ground. The top dies. The next year it takes all that energy stored in the root, and it makes a great big flower stalk, and it produces seeds, and then it dies because it's reproduced. So that's a biennial crop.
Ah, I see.
So potatoes are technically a perennial crop. They grow, they make tubers underneath the ground, then the top of it dies back for a long time, and then the next year it sprouts back up again from the potatoes and it comes back. Ah. But in cold climates, the potato is not a perennial crop. And it's not a very good perennial anyways, because it tends to pick up a lot of diseases and pests after a year in the ground. You don't want to just let it keep growing and growing and growing. It's better to spread it around, take the potatoes, move them somewhere else. Sweet potatoes are another perennial crop, but they grow their best potatoes the first year. So you just take cuttings from sweet potatoes and plant them out, and you've got them again.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So a lot of the roots are technically perennials, but they may not be perennial in a cold climate.
I see. Now, what would you advise to someone, some people, they're starting off and they're, the land they have or little plot they have is, less than ideal. You'd mentioned in Florida, you had, just the sandy, horrible soil. So I know in your composting book, you talk a lot about this. How do you build up soil in a way without just dumping chemicals on it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The best way is if you have a bit of compost that you can add, but sometimes you have a larger space and you say, well, I can't make enough compost to feed it. Traditionally, people would gather cow manure or chicken manure or pig manure or something like that and use it to enrich the soil to grow for a season. But if you want it to really be rich long-term, mulching is a very good way to go. If you can get a bunch of leaves or wood chips or rotten straw or hay, that sort of thing, and let it rot down into the ground underneath gets softer, it fills full of worms, it gets a lot of life in it, and it grows. But if you don't have a lot of material that you can throw down, or if you're concerned, because a lot of hay and mulch and manure now has pesticides or herbicides in it that can actually damage or kill a garden.
Ah, right.
So it makes it worse. Traditional methods don't work like they used to. Sometimes people will put down hay on their garden, and then all of the plants start curling up and twisting because they spray lots and lots of herbicides onto the hay fields to kill weeds. It doesn't kill the grass, it doesn't kill the hay, but it kills all the weeds. And the grass takes it all up. So when it's cut as hay and you put it into your garden, everything around it dies except for grass. And so it's awful, you know?
Yeah.
It's a very toxic system. So the way I've found to garden and grow a larger area, if I don't have enough mulch and I don't have access to safe manure, because the cows will eat hay. The hay has the herbicides on it. The hay passes through the cow's digestion, and then when you compost the manure is still toxic and can kill a garden for the next year. Wow. This is a big problem in the United States right now, is the chemicals they spray on the fields. Yeah. They get into all the cows' feed, and then the cow manure is not safe anymore. So if you don't have a safe source, or let's say you're in a backyard, you don't make enough compost, you don't want to go buy any, and you don't have any cows nearby that you can borrow from, you can take a barrel or a bucket and take your weeds and throw weeds in there. You can throw some fish guts in there. Fish guts are really good fertilizer. So if you have a friend that goes fishing or there's a local fish market, you can take a little bit of the leftovers of the fish and throw them in a bucket. You can even use urine. You can take urine and put a little bit into the bucket, put a quart or two into a 5-gallon bucket.
Yeah, it's in your book. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yep, it's very high in nitrogen. And then what you do is you just cover this bucket and you let it rot for a few weeks. Then you strain out the grasses or whatever's there, and you use that tea to water your garden beds with. Usually you would thin it out. You know, thin it out 1 part tea to maybe 4 or 5 parts or 6 parts water, and water along those garden beds. It smells very bad, but plants don't have noses, so they don't care.
Right.
And that allows you to take a small amount of fertility and feed organically without having to go use any chemicals or get a whole bunch of material to cover the ground.
Yeah, I know in your book, the composting book, you also mentioned that even, human waste, I mean, composting toilets or things like that, that as long as you, tell me if I'm correct about this, but as long as you bury it, it's safe. You don't want to spray it on the top because then you can spread disease. Is that correct?
Yes, if you bury it or compost it, compost it for at least a year. That makes it safe. If you bury it deep, bury it a couple of feet deep, you can plant on top and it's no problem. But you don't want to do that in an area where it floods.
The runoff, yeah.
Because it can fill up and run off. You don't want that. You don't want to make a health problem. But I believe that God designed the system in a way that the wastes that we create feeds the soil, feeds the plants, which in turn feed us. There's a cycle that's designed. And if we take all of our waste and we throw it into a big city system of sewers, they have to spend all the money to clean it all up again and run the water back through filters and everything, and then we end up, getting the water with chlorine and fluoride and everything else back to us. It's much better to be able to reuse all the waste coming through our kitchens and even the waste that we create ourselves to go back into nature. That's a much more natural system. But if it's not managed properly, you end up with cholera and diseases and all these horrible things, such as you see in Africa, where people will use they'll just go to the bathroom right by the river or dump sewage directly into a river, and downstream they're drinking from the river, and people get sick and they die.
Right.
You don't want a situation like that.
So handle with care with that. But it's possible as long as you compost it a year, bury it deeply.
Quite possible to be safe, yes.
Interesting. I just had a question. It just zipped right out of my mind. Oh, well, anyway. What would you say, just in kind of the reasons to do this? Because maybe there's some people and it sounds interesting, but for you, what were the reasons besides your just interest in plants? What benefits are there, do you think, for most people, like just average people, to start growing your own food or some of your own food?
There are a lot of benefits to it. If you look in terms of direct benefits, a lot of the food that you buy in the market or in the grocery store or even from a farmer directly has been sprayed with chemicals. They have a lot of, there are chemicals for pest control, there are chemical fertilizers, there are herbicides, and a lot of that gets into our food. So if you're worried about what could be in your food, growing your own food means you don't have to worry anymore. You know exactly what's in your food. Another benefit is that the food that you pick from your own garden will be the highest quality and the freshest food you could ever get. Because if you go to the market, they probably picked it the day before or perhaps that morning, and some hours have gone by, and the produce is not as perfectly fresh as when it's first picked. There is evidence that the enzymes, the sugars, the nutrients and everything are at their very highest when you have just picked them. So if you're picking a salad and bringing it inside, it has not begun to decay at all. You're getting it right out of your garden, and you know that there are no herbicides on it. You know that there's no pesticides on it. And I don't mind if there's a hole in a leaf that a bug ate, because if you see a piece of produce that looks absolutely perfect, that means that even the bugs don't want to eat it. It's not something with a little bit of spotting, a little bit of bug holes in it. That means it's probably not been poisoned. And if it's imperfect, if it's coming from your yard and you have to cut a little bad spot out of it or something, great. I would much rather eat that than an absolutely perfect apple that has been coated in wax and sprayed with 27 different chemicals. It's just, hey.
Well, even organic. I wonder, what's your take on organic? How legit is organic? You go to, let's say, Whole Foods is the big one. You go there and they got this, organic food, and they've shipped it in usually from another continent. How trustworthy is that? For me, I don't trust it, honestly. Not certainly, like you said, if you grow your own, It
is, from what I've read, it's generally better than buying chemical versions, but it's not nearly as good as growing your own directly. Mm-hmm. Almost everything that a government gets involved in is done poorly. Yeah. And it's a good way. In the United States, that if it's labeled organic, it's not a genetically modified organism. So that's one nice thing. You're worried about GMO food, that if it's organic, it's not supposed to be a genetically modified organism. It also keeps, the worst of the weed killers and the pesticides out of it. I would rather eat organic food than eat the chemical food. But I do know that stuff is allowed in organic farming that I probably wouldn't do on my own land. Mm-hmm. So I would rather grow my own. And again, you're eating an apple that maybe is 2 weeks old if you're getting it from the organic market. It's probably been kept in a refrigerator. It might be months old, which is fine. Yeah. But it's not as good as getting one right off the tree. There's nothing like getting a sun-ripened tip-top fruit. They cannot pick them at peak ripeness and ship them to the store because they won't keep. So they pick them a little early and let them ripen up under controlled conditions. Well, they don't get that last bit of nutrients and sugar and enzymes and all those wonderful things from the sunlight and from the mother tree when they're being picked early and often being treated in a chamber with ethylene gas in order to ripen them up and make them look nice and shiny and red. You can get them right off the tree, and you're going to get much higher quality of nutrition in a better for you fruit.
What would be? Well, go ahead.
But you asked about other benefits. Other benefits are just the security of having some of your own food. A lot of farmers have learned that they're not that secure. A company comes in and says, hey, if you farm your acreage and you plant nothing but corn, we will give you such and such amount of money if you do all this corn for us. And so they may cut down their old fruit trees that their grandparents planted and plant the whole area with corn, and then they have to go to the store and buy their own food. They may have gained money, but they've lost security.
Yeah.
There's a lot of security to having your own food in the ground. If you have a few chickens, if you have, a few goats, if you have some fruit trees, if you have some nut trees, whatever you have, even just a few fruit trees can produce hundreds of pounds of food. If you have some beds that have root crops in them, and you have a few beds that have salad greens in them, and you know how to garden, and you know how to grow your own food, and something bad happens, the grocery store shuts down, your country gets in a war, you have the security of having some food and also having the knowledge to grow more food. Because if you've never gardened before and you think, well, if things ever get bad, I'll put in a garden. No, there's a learning curve on gardening. It's like jumping into a car. You can't just jump into a car and drive a car. You have to learn how to do it properly or you're going to kill yourself. So with gardening, you're not going to have much success, usually just starting from scratch with no experience. So the security of having a garden is a great thing. And also the being outdoors, being connected to the food that you grow, the feeling of being able to go out for 15, 20 minutes a day and see what's growing and pick a few ripe tomatoes, pick a few berries, go see that the apple tree is blooming and watch the bees with your kids. Those are wonderful things. And there's just a sense of peace of being out there among the growing, all the stuff that you're growing and seeing year after year the trees get bigger and things produce and you see a tree bloom for the first time and it's a miracle. That sort of thing it's very hard to replace with I'm going to the grocery store to buy a bag of apples.
Right. Well, we've talked on my channel quite a bit about too, just voluntary simplicity and financial independence and these kind of topics as well. And for me, that it connects because especially psychologically, as you said, just knowing that you've got a food supply that no matter what happens, you lose your job, the economy completely collapses, the stock market goes down. My wife's Japanese, and her grandfather was telling us that they survived the war because they had a little garden, they have this little area in the countryside and they grew their own food, and that's how they survived and got through, like for the last years of the war. It's interesting.
Yeah. In the United States during the Great Depression, some people that were smallholder farmers barely felt the depression because they were homesteading their own land. They'd been scratching by before. They scratched right through the Great Depression, and they had their own food. They had good fresh food. They had bacon,
right?
They had bacon and eggs. They had homegrown brandy. They had what they needed.
Right. Well, and also too, I often think that there's a connection too with this kind of sustenance farming, being this kind of independence and liberty, freedom. You look at the United States in the beginning and how the large percentage of the populace that they weren't large scale farmers, but they were farmers. They grew enough to take care of their families, and that provided a huge amount of independence. Whereas now, if you're a an employee of a company, they control you to a large degree. There's a huge amount of power there as well.
It's true, and you gain security and you gain freedom. And the cities are toxic. They're psychologically toxic. They're physically toxic. They are awful places of just to live and work and be just to be tied to that wheel. And small networks of small farmers, just farmers all across the countryside, growing their own food, taking care of their own land. It doesn't matter what goes on far away. The farmers just keep going. Mm-hmm. Whereas if something goes wrong in a city, things get bad very, very, very quickly. And it requires a very high level of organization and restraint to keep a city running. a city turns into a nightmare very quickly when the food supplies break up. Whereas the countryside, you know, people are going to just be able to keep going most of the time, right through.
How much do you think is required for, let's say, I don't know, the family of 4? You know, what kind of scale are we talking about to reasonably feed a family of 4, or maybe to make enough food and then, you know, be able to trade some? Like, how difficult would that be?
I think if you have a it's going to depend by climate, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in the tropics, you can grow a lot more food in a small space than you can, say, if you're in, you know, Russia.
Right.
Northern Russia, you know, or Minnesota, or Northern Europe, Scandinavia. You know, you might only have 90 frost-free days.
Wow.
So in that case, see, if I have a 1/4 acre in the tropics and I can grow on it year-round, but somebody living in northern Michigan has a 1/4 acre, they can only grow on it maybe 1/4 of the year.
Yeah.
So there's a huge difference. They might need an acre to produce the same amount of food that I can produce on a 1/4 acre. But it gets even tougher than that, because when you get that far north, you have to have food plants that produce food for you in a very short period of time. So your options are very limited. If you decide to grow a, you know, an African yam, the African yams get 20, 30, or an Asian yam, 30, 40 pounds. You can get this gigantic, you know, it might be 30,000 calories in the ground, a monstrous root.
Mm-hmm.
You could grow those if you have 250 frost-free days, or, you know, a year frost-free. If you have a full year, you know, you can grow that. That root's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. But if you are in some place like, you know, upper Michigan, you can't grow that. You don't have the time. It's barely getting started when the frosts come. So you're stuck with small grains, or with potatoes, or you may just have to raise grazing animals and let them eat grass. And then you have to store lots and lots of grass through the winter in order to keep them fed. If you're going to be self-sufficient with animals, you have to store a huge amount of food for the animals through the winter, or buy it from somewhere, which means you're not really self-sufficient. So a 1/4 acre in the tropics may be equivalent to 4 or 5 acres of land farther north.
Wow. Is that why you're in Central America?
Yes. That's part of it. That's part of it.
Yeah.
So, like, my land right now is a 1/2 acre, and I'm actually going to start today planting cassava and yam roots in beds. So I'm going to go over with my camera and I'll film how I dig beds and plant yams and cassava. But I'm not going to be able to harvest those yams for a year, because they have a very strong growing season. They'll grow all the way from now until December. Then they'll die back for a few months, and I can dig them again up until May. There's, like, I could start digging them in January. So really, what is that, 8 months or so from now? So it's going to be a long, you know, January, February, March, I would dig them, you know, somewhere in there. When they go to sleep again, I can dig them. But that's a, you know, if I was up north and I hadn't started on my gardens, let's see, it's May 31st. I only have June, July, August, September, and then the frosts come. I've got 4 months. I have no time.
Right.
So I might be able to, you know, plant some cabbages right now, but I would have to plant a lot of cabbages. So in terms of what does it take to feed your family, you're going to have to look at the climate first. Generally, if you have 5,000 to 10,000 square feet, so like a 1/4 acre garden, you're going to get a large amount of your family's nutrition and vegetables. You'll have lots of vegetables, that's lots of space. That'll give you space for berries and tomatoes and beans and cabbages and things you can preserve. But you may not be able to meet your family's complete calorie requirements. the amount of calories you need per day. You'll get all their health requirements, all the great, wonderful, healthy vegetables, all of the seasonings you need. You can grow, you know, your onions and your garlic and basil and rosemary and thyme and all that wonderful stuff. But if you wanted to grow all of their calories as well, you're going to need probably another 1/4 acre of potatoes, you know, in order to do it. Or you trade some of your produce to your neighbor that raises chickens, and you get chickens and eggs. You know, it makes sense. One guy might take a 1/4 acre, and that's his chicken yard, and he raises a few hundred chickens, and he sells the meat, and he sells the eggs. And then his neighbor next door might raise a whole bunch of vegetables, and they trade. That would be ideal.
Yeah.
But you're probably going to need, a couple of acre farm to feed a family of 4. I have a family of 10. I have 8 children. So
Nicely done.
We have 1 on the way, so I will have 9 children later this year.
Ah, good for you. That's great.
So that's another reason why we grow our own food. What I try to do is grow the things that are expensive first. So you save all that money, you know? So if you're always buying herbs, or you're always buying lettuce or cabbages or tomatoes, grow those first and save your money. If you know that you can't grow all your calories, well, buy the calories and grow the stuff that's really expensive.
Yeah. Because, you know, plain rice is cheap, for example, right?
Rice is really cheap. Flour is cheap. Potatoes are cheap. But herbs and fresh vegetables and tomatoes and peppers are not that cheap. So you might be able to grow thousands of dollars worth of produce in a few small gardens in your backyard every year and take a big budget off. Another benefit is, if you don't have a lot of money and you grow expensive crops, you can really eat much better than you would be able to eat normally. Because a package of seeds costs $1 or $2. So you plant the seeds, then you get hundreds of dollars worth of produce. Like, I have a friend who grew a whole bunch of mushrooms. He grew all these edible mushrooms. Mushrooms are very, very expensive. They might be $15 a pound for the gourmet mushrooms he was growing. But he could eat mushrooms every single day. He could eat thousands of dollars worth of mushrooms because he grew them in buckets in his closet, you know?
Right.
And it cost him very little to grow them.
Right.
So if you're doing that with your herbs and your vegetables, and particularly don't compare it to the cheapest produce that you can buy, compare it to the freshest, best organic produce on the market.
Well, right. A lot of people complain about that. Oh, I can't afford to eat organic. I can't afford to eat healthy. But grow your own. You can.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
One more question for me, and then I'll scan the live stream here. Just about you talk some in your book, the survival gardening book, about minimizing the reliance on technology. So design. And the need for irrigation and pest control, all of this. What are kind of your main strategies or approaches for, as you said, minimizing the work, keeping things as simple as possible, and still getting the great results?
I like to use methods that don't require me to work very hard, but also don't require me to spend a lot of money. I don't mind putting in some work with hand tools because it's healthy. I don't want to sit on a tractor. A lot of farmers are fat in the United States.
Yeah.
They're fat and they're unhealthy. They're drinking a soda, sitting on their tractor. They weigh 350 pounds. And they're just plowing corn all day because they're not working. They're not really working the ground, and they're not eating well. So I don't mind doing some work. It's healthy and good to go out and dig and fork the ground and that sort of thing. But I also don't want to kill my back. I'm almost 40, and I don't have the strength, just the ability to just go throwing things around and recover really easily like I used to. If I wrench my shoulder or something, it takes a few days to get better. And and I don't want to have to work stupid hard, like digging ditches levels to grow my food. So I've discovered a few tools that that I really like. I really like the traditional garden digging hoe, where it has a large head on it. You'll see this in Asia and in Africa. The Romans used to use hoes like this, big digging head like this. So instead of taking a shovel and shoveling it and twisting and throwing and shoveling and twisting and throwing like this, you are using the head of the hoe and you're just bringing it down, and the weight of the hoe head, chop, chop.
Yeah.
You can move a lot of dirt, and it's a nice even motion like this instead of that shove, kick, dig, twist, throw. You know, you really. If you're digging ditches that way, you really feel it. But if you have a good digging hoe, that makes a big difference. Sometimes it's called a grub hoe, an adze hoe. There's a bunch of different names according to the culture. I like one with a long handle. Sometimes you'll see short-handled ones. You'll see shots from Africa of a woman bent at her waist over the ground chopping. And in places in Asia, it's the same thing. It's a very short handle. I'm over 6 foot tall, and I don't like to try and bend at the waist and hack at the ground. It's hard on the back. I'd rather have a long handle that I can just whack and dig without having to hunch over and hurt my back. Another tool that I really love is called the broad fork, and it is not a common garden tool at all, but it takes the place of a tiller or digging and forking the ground. It is a tool. You know what? I'm going to draw it for you. Okay. You guys can see, right? I'm going to draw right now what a broad fork looks like, and then you can see it. This will not be the most beautiful drawing in the world, but
no worries.
It's live. It's live, so there you go. All right, so right here, say this is the ground. You have a broad fork. See this toothy looking thing right here?
Oh yeah.
It's 4 tines on the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, like a big fork. It's like the head of a fork.
Yeah.
Let's say this is the ground here, and it's sticking in the ground, and it's got 2 handles.
Oh, kind of like.
And so you stand in between the handles, and you rock it back and forth. So a man would stand like, let's see, I'm going to put it. He's got 1 knee up and 1 leg on the ground, and he's going to fork it up. Oh yeah, and he has to have a hat. 1 second. This is live. This is quality content. All right, so a man is standing. You've got the guy standing on top of the fork like that, and he pushes it into. And you stand there and you rock it back and forth.
Like kind of, yeah.
And the fork actually works its way into the ground, and the spikes on the bottom are 14 inches long. So they will loosen the ground to 14 inches. Whereas a tractor or a tiller usually only loosens the ground 6 inches on a tiller, maybe 12 inches on a tractor. So you've got 14 inches, and it's a nice even rocking motion, and you go down with the fork, and you roll it back, and it breaks the ground, and then you go and you pull it back and forth, and you break the ground. That's the way I put in my garden beds now. It's a nice little bit of work. It's not very hard work. My wife only weighs a little over 100 pounds, and she can dig a bed, and it doesn't hurt her, you know.
Oh yeah.
And so you loosen the ground up and you mound the soil, and I use my digging hoe to cut the paths and to pull the mounds up. So I'll make a mound. You know, I'll loosen the soil. I'll dig the dirt up from the paths. I'll make a nice little mound in a little gap, and then I'll make another mound and another gap. And I work right in the ground. I don't like to spend money to build the borders of beds. I just use mounds like you would do in most of the world that doesn't have a lot of money, and they just want to grow food. It's not about making it look pretty or perfect or anything else. It's about growing the most amount of food for the least amount of work. And I don't think you need to be a carpenter to be a gardener, you know?
Yeah, right. And what's the name of that tool again? Sorry, again, that one.
It's called a broad fork.
Broad fork. Okay.
Broad fork. So wide, broad, and then a fork. You know, so it's a fork that sticks into the ground, but it's broad, and it's got 2 handles on the top, and you rock it back and forth into the ground. It's not very common, but it's becoming more common as people have rediscovered this old piece of technology and realized, you know, this is actually a very good tool. For other tools, I like to have a machete. I like to have shovels for digging. I also believe in sharpening my tools. If I'm gonna hoe, I'll have a light garden hoe to knock the weeds down. I will sharpen that hoe with a file so it's very, very sharp, like a knife. Yeah. And then when I go along the ground and cut weeds, it's really easy. It's not hard to hoe if you have a sharp hoe. Taking 5 minutes to sharpen it makes a huge difference. It's not like, I'm trying to kill these weeds like this.
right.
Chick, 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 chick. You know, and it just seems like it's just something that people miss sometimes. Sharpen the tools, and they work for themselves. Much easier.
All right, fantastic. I'm going to go and just, if you don't mind, do you have a few more minutes? Is okay?
Sure, absolutely.
Right. Just going to take some comments or questions from those watching. Interesting, so we've got a very international audience, and your comment about security has kind of resonated with a bunch of people. Marek from Poland. In the case of a cataclysm or war, it is your own crop that gives you some security. This is true.
Yes.
And then we've got Hamza agreeing, couldn't agree more. If you fall into a problem, your garden will save you for a long time, providing you basic needs. You don't need money. You need a basic supply of food.
That's right.
And I think that, what's interesting, though, is I think that, in some countries that have had these cataclysms or wars or economic collapses or currency collapses, more recently, they understand everything you're saying. But then places like the United States where we haven't, although I think we probably will soon. I think we all know there's a risk, big risk, but people just sort of take, just walk into the grocery store. It's always going to be there. Why would there ever be a problem?
I agree. And I think that a lot of the large governments and the world governments and all this, the European Union, they don't realize, they're so busy living in their world of banking and power and cities. A lot of these people don't garden. They don't go outside. For them, something like wheat is an investment on the stock market. We're going to invest in wheat futures or agriculture futures, or let's just throw some money over there and subsidize this, or throw some money over there and subsidize this. There's so much central control and power that they're missing the fact that the real strength is in families owning their own land and growing their own food. That is the traditional, that's where wealth and security comes from, is the people that are producing the food and raising their own children. I strongly believe in private property and in a man owning his own land. His land should be protected. Like if you read the Old Testament and you look at the laws that God laid down for his people, and he said, don't move the boundary stones, don't steal a man's land, don't steal at all, don't take a man's goat. If you take a man's goat, you have to pay him back with 2 goats. Mm-hmm. That a person growing their own food, after shelter and water, food is the next thing that everybody needs. And if the food supply is all in the hands of gigantic corporations and governments rather than in the hands of families that love their children and want to give them the best possible, then you have an unstable world, and it's very likely to crash and collapse and fall apart. The more people move into the cities and away from growing their own food, the less connected we are to the soil and what actually sustains us as cultures.
Well, and that's exactly what you just said. I know you'll agree because you were homeschooled, but I feel the same way about that centralization of education. That is the same problem, and the sickness we see in so many, really worldwide, in these school systems that have become more and more and more centralized and now taken over and converged. That and the solution also, is families being responsible for the education of their own children, growing their own food, having their own land. That it's an overall principle, I think, right, of decentralization and
right. The culture should be built from the family up, not from the top down.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Great. All right, let's see. Just a couple more questions. I won't keep you too long, but this has been really fascinating. Okay, now here's a nice question. Jack Christian asks, do you think it's a good idea to apply technology, for example, automatic watering systems or AI in gardening or agriculture? So this, going high tech. What's your opinion about that?
I think if you understand it and you want to do it, if there is a good, if you look at the numbers and you say, well, I can grow more good food on a larger space if I use drones or if I use automatic watering and that sort of thing. But I also think you should have fallback plans that you can count on, because I know that my garden tools are not going to fail if there is an electromagnetic pulse, if the grid is shut off, if if there's a big storm. I'm not going to lose it because it's not super complicated. A lot of times I think people like a system like aquaponics, where you have the fish in tanks, and you have water, and you have bubblers, and you have solar panels and piping and pumps, and you look at all this stuff, you go, wow, that looks like science to me. Yeah. That is so amazing. I need that. That's got to be the way we do it. But you constantly have to fiddle with all the bits and pieces. You have to trust that you can get the supplies for it in plumbing. You have to make sure you know how to fix solar panels. If there's a power outage in your solar, you don't have enough sun, your fish all die. If you don't have solar panels on it at all, your fish will die if the power goes out. If there's a lot of things that can go wrong because the system has gotten more complicated. So if you want to experiment with that sort of thing, I would say it's wise to understand the fundamentals of basic dirt farming first. Learn how to do that and have that, so you have this system here to fall back on in case this fails. So say you have if you have a car, but you know that the gas supply is not always going to be there, it's a good idea to have a bicycle as well. You have a bicycle so you can get around. A bicycle is a way more efficient tool than a car. It takes much less energy to run, but it's not as convenient. And you can't move your whole family around on a bicycle very easily. So it's good to have an understanding of the very simple systems as well. I think that there's probably a good place for technology in gardening, but personally I work on the human scale, and I like to use as simple as possible, because I hate it when things break, and I hate having to spend money to fix them.
Excellent. Rafikul asks, how can fertilizers, I guess chemical fertilizers, harm gardens and agriculture? What are the downsides of using bought or chemical fertilizers?
A lot of the problems with the chemical fertilizers is that they are used instead of building up the soil properly. So it's like if you get up in the morning and you need to get through your day, and you drink a cup of coffee and you eat some pastry or you eat a slice of cake, it may fill your stomach and get you moving through the day, but that's not taking proper care of your body. You're going to, it burns up too fast. It does not build your bones and your muscles well. It may fill your stomach and give you energy, and you're going to get through the day, but you're not going to be healthy long term. So when you put on the chemical fertilizer, it's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, 3 major nutrients. But plants can use upwards of 70 different minerals. So manganese, a little bit of manganese, a little bit of cobalt, a little bit of calcium, a little bit of magnesium, iron, sulfur. All these things are important for the plants, but you're giving them, here's some carbohydrates, here's some protein, here's some fat, grow. But they're not getting everything else they need to build strong. And another thing is often the chemical fertilizers run through the ground quickly. The plants get the food, they grow really fast, and then they're like, oh, I'm starting to burn out. So you got to give them another hit. You got to give them another hit. if you and that washes through, and a lot of it gets wasted, and a lot of it runs down into the rivers. Some of them also will build up salt in the soil. They're often too harsh for the microbiology of the soil. So your fungi, the worms being macrobiology, but the life in the soil, the bacteria, a lot of these things are working together underneath the ground to keep the plant fed, to make new soil, to break down soil particles into useful minerals for the plants, to provide water. Fungi actually go through the soil and move water around that the plants can get. But when you throw on chemical fertilizer and it goes through, it can be too harsh and it can burn back and kill some of the microbiology of the soil. So you're not building a long-term healthy soil, you're just giving them that hit that they need right off the bat to keep growing. And you can take a very bad piece of ground and grow food on it by throwing chemical fertilizer on it. But it just is sitting there and burning, and the plants will grow and you can get a yield from them. But that yield is not going to have the nutrition that you should have in your diet.
Yeah, right.
It grows, it produces fruit, but that fruit is not going to be as nutritionally dense as you should be eating. So I strongly believe in fertilizing with a wide range of organic matter as possible. If you can get seaweed or even dried seaweed and crush it up and throw it into your garden beds, seaweed has a lot of minerals in it. Fish guts have a lot of minerals in them from the ocean. If you go and you dig up pond plants and you throw them in there, there's a lot of minerals there. If you can make compost from all the different food types that are coming into your house, including the meat, throw the meat into the compost pile, make sure the rats don't get to it, make sure it's covered, put it in the middle of the pile. It's full of minerals, and just let it all break down. And then your plants will have the highest level of nutrition possible. If it was a choice between growing food on bad soil with chemical fertilizer and not eating, I would grow the food on bad soil with chemical fertilizer. But if I have my choice, I would much rather grow organically and get as many minerals into the ground as possible, keep the soil alive, and continue to build the soil up rather than just turn it, throw chemicals on it, get the plants to grow, they die, I have to throw chemicals on it again. If you build the soil well, you get less disease problems, you have higher mineral content, and you get healthier food.
Nice. Merrick again with a nice comment. I think that self-produced food also teaches respect for food and for people who produce it. Then you know how much it costs to work. How it requires good weather. You have experience with windstorms and hurricanes and other problems. You really understand where your food's coming from. So that's
true. And you also realize how unnatural it is to have apples all year round, or to have broccoli all year round. How does that happen?
Yeah, right.
You know?
Right. Here's an excellent question from Lena. I was going to ask this before. How to save plants from insects? I guess
that's a good
without toxic chemicals.
But first of all, the very best thing is to be in your garden regularly. If you plant your garden to the back of your yard, where you're not going to see it, except when you go out to it, there may be a pest problem that you miss. So if your gardens are near where you walk and live, you're going to see, hey, look at that, there's a caterpillar on there. I'm going to pick him off and throw him. You know, if you are around your garden regularly, it's pretty easy to knock a lot of those pests out. You see some eggs that have been laid on the bottom of one of your tomato leaves. You're looking around your tomatoes, you go, look at those eggs. Well, let me get rid of those before they hatch into caterpillars. You're going to catch the problem before it gets big. Another thing is, if you leave space for nature, it seems crazy, but more insects are better than less insects. We like to control everything. We like to say, I'm going to spray everything. I want to kill all the bugs.
Yeah.
But some bugs eat other bugs. Some bugs are pollinating your plants. Some bugs are considered beneficial insects. Some of them are pest insects. If you get rid of all of them, the pest insects always come back first. They breed very fast. They just exist. They want to come and eat your plant. So you're constantly going to have to keep fighting with those pest insects because there are no predators to come and eat them. So if you can tolerate a little bit of pest insects, they provide food for the predator insects, which will balance out the system. It's like if you get sick and the doctor says, take some antibiotics. You take the antibiotics and it kills a lot of the bacteria in your stomach, and then you have an upset stomach and you have an unhealthy digestion. So people say, well, you need to eat some fermented food, some yogurt, eat some kefir, have some kombucha tea, eat something fermented, have some sauerkraut, kimchi. These things will help restore your digestion because they put bacteria back into it. Those are living food full of bacteria. When you get rid of everything, you have an unstable system and the pests will come back in. Now, you do get a lot of pest problems if you have your garden. If you have a yard, an empty space, and you have a garden and you plant your little tomatoes in it and your lettuces and everything comes and goes. All the bugs say, oh, that's so delicious. Thank you for putting that out for us. And they all start showing up and eating it. And it takes a few weeks sometimes for the predators to come. And at that point, maybe you've lost most of your plants.
Oh.
So what you do is you leave spaces for predator insects and the pest insects to live. So in England, they would have hedgerows where you had hazelnut plants and wildflowers and weeds and berries, a big mess. And the birds would live in there, and a lot of the birds eat insects. Wasps would live in there. Wasps eat other insects constantly. Wasps eat caterpillars all the time. So if you spray and kill the wasp nests around your house, it's like breeding caterpillars. So you're getting rid of the natural protection that will protect your garden. So if you have a space of weeds, you have an area that you don't take much care of, you just let nature live in it. If you have those plants, or even if you plant a bunch of perennial plants, say you plant a flower bed and you put some grasses in it and some herbs in it and you've got all kinds of little things growing in there, well, that's a space that your bees and your wasps and your praying mantises and ladybugs, all these things can live in there through the year. You're not ever cutting it all the way down to nothing. When you have a big bare space and you have a few edible plants in it, everything comes and goes, I'm going to eat that. But if you have a space nearby where the predators and the prey both live, there is a kind of a controlled ecosystem.
Right.
It's like in Yellowstone National Park in the United States, they had wolves in the park. And the government said, we are going to take care of this park and make sure that nobody ever builds here. So we're going to take care of it. It will be a national park. So they built this national park, and they killed the wolves because the wolves were dangerous. Well, what happened when they killed the wolves were lots and lots of deer bred. And the deer started eating all of the plants and the undergrowth because there were way too many deer and there was nothing to kill the deer. You can't hunt the deer. It's a national park. We don't want that. So they ended up having to have people come hunt the deer and get the deer out because they had gotten rid of the wolves that controlled the deer. But at that point, the deer had eaten a lot of the plants in the undergrowth, so they had problems with erosion. They had problems with other invasive species coming in. They've had one problem after another because they changed the environment and they got rid of part of it. So if you go in and you spray, you don't know what the long-term effects are on the environment. You're going to lose all of those predators. So the first thing that I would do is stop killing the wasps, and I would plant some flower beds or let the weeds grow near your garden but not in your garden. Leave some wild spots for the bugs to live in, and you will have a healthier set of gardens. After the first 2 years of me doing that, I had almost no pest problems in my garden. The final thing is feed the soil. If you are feeding the soil well and the plants have lots of minerals, they've got compost, you're putting some leaves down and letting them rot, you are bringing in all of the nutrition that a plant needs. A lot of people get sick and die because they're malnourished. Plants are the same way. If the plants are malnourished, they can't fight off a pest issue. A pest comes by and takes a couple of bites, that doesn't kill a plant. But if the plant is already sick, it might just go, I'm dead, and give up.
Right.
So that makes a difference too.
Well, David, thank you so much. People who are interested to learn more, to get started, where should they start with you? What would you recommend?
You can subscribe to my channel on YouTube at David the Good. If you look for David the Good, you'll find me.
It's just David the Good, no spaces. Is that right?
Just you can. Yeah, it's the
I'm gonna type
YouTube
it in
use
right
for
now.
David the Good, but yeah, if you were to type out the link, no spaces. But if you search for David the Good, you'll find me. Just look for my long face,
Right.
and you'll spot me. You can also find my gardening website at thesurvivalgardener.com.
Thesurvivalgardener.com. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Thesurvivalgardener.com.
Okay.
And then I have my gardening books for sale on Amazon.com. So whatever your local version of Amazon is, I'm probably on there.
And again, your author name, David the Good.
David the Good. Yes.
Thank you so much. Very, very interesting. As usual, so many comments and questions and things. So we'll probably tomorrow, what I often do with these interviews is I'll do a follow-up show where I'll go back and replay parts and explain some of the vocab that you used, and we'll discuss some of the ideas that you had.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe send me a link. I'll tune in.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Will do. And maybe we can have you back again in the future, because I can see right away this is a popular topic.
Well, I appreciate it, and thank you to all of you guys that tuned in and watched. I hope your gardens do very well this year.
All right, thank you. Good talking to you. Thanks, David.
You too.
Bye-bye. All right. Excellent. That was very interesting. Fascinating. I know you guys enjoyed that because I could see you all typing furiously with lots of questions and comments. I've got to go. I've got a baby in the other room. My wife stayed up late watching the baby for me while I did the interview. So I really need to run and so this is my babysitting time. So wonderful. Again, with David, so many interesting topics. I really wanted to jump in and ask him a lot about homeschooling, because you all know that's I'm very passionate about that topic. But I wanted to keep the focus on gardening and food growing this time. That's the main thing we wanted to talk about. But maybe in a future time, we could have him back on to discuss. I'd love to just hear about his experiences with, growing up, being homeschooled. I didn't ask him, but I'm kind of guessing that he's homeschooling his children. And also, of course, lots of practical. A lot of you have questions tomorrow, probably tomorrow or the next day. Maybe tomorrow, because we're not doing the book club tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow we'll do a show. We'll do the follow-up show. We'll review some vocab, and then we can review questions and comments you have, and we can see if there are any specific topics you want to talk to him about or have him talk about next time. To focus in on, I don't know, pest control or building soil or whatever. So we'll see. So anyway, thanks. Really great. Very interesting. Remember his YouTube channel, David the Good. David the Good on YouTube. His website is Survival Gardener. No spaces, all together. Thesurvivalgardener.com. Thesurvivalgardener.com. I'll put links on my YouTube. In the info area, I'll put links on my Gab and my Twitter also. So, David the Good on YouTube. Thank you so much. And for everybody else, lots of love to you. Thanks a lot. Hope you enjoyed this interview. I certainly did. And I'll see you next time. Bye for now. Oh,